Let me tell you about something that space agencies don't like to talk about, a reality so disturbing, so fundamentally threatening, that it casts a shadow over every dream of human space exploration. We imagine astronauts as heroes, returning triumphantly from the cosmos, celebrated and healthy, ready to share their adventures. But the truth is far more troubling. Coming back kills you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, insidiously, in ways that transform the human body into something damaged, weakened, fundamentally altered. The journey to space is dangerous, yes, but the return to Earth might be even more deadly. Every astronaut who has spent significant time in space returns to a body that has been changed in ways we're only beginning to understand. Their bones have thinned, their muscles have withered, their hearts have shrunk, their eyes have been damaged, their DNA has been altered, their immune systems have been compromised, their brains have been reshaped, and the longer they stay in space, the worse it gets. The astronauts who will journey to Mars, spending years in microgravity and exposed to cosmic radiation, may face consequences so severe that their return to Earth becomes not a homecoming, but a slow-motion medical catastrophe. This is the terrifying reason astronauts can never return to Earth safely. Not because of some dramatic accident, but because space itself, the environment we dream of exploring, is fundamentally hostile to human biology. And the return to Earth's gravity, after adaptation to weightlessness, is a brutal reintroduction to forces the body is no longer equipped to handle. Let me take you through what really happens to astronauts, because understanding this requires confronting uncomfortable truths about the limits of human exploration. Let me start with what happens to the human body in space. When astronauts leave Earth, they escape gravity, the force that has shaped every aspect of human biology for millions of years. Our bones, our muscles, our cardiovascular system, our vestibular system, even our cells, all of these evolved under the constant pull of Earth's gravity. Remove that pull, and the body begins to fall apart. The first thing to go is the cardiovascular system. On Earth, your heart works constantly against gravity, pumping blood up to your brain, fighting the tendency of blood to pool in your legs. This is hard work, and your heart and blood vessels are built for it. In microgravity, there's no up or down. Blood doesn't pool in your legs. It distributes evenly throughout your body, with more flowing to your head. Your face puffs up, your legs thin out. Astronauts call this puffy face bird leg syndrome. Your body interprets this fluid shift as an excess of blood. In response, it starts shedding fluid. You urinate more, you lose plasma volume. Within days, you've lost significant amounts of blood volume. Your heart, no longer needing to work as hard, begins to shrink and weaken. Studies have shown that astronauts' hearts can atrophy by up to 25% during long-duration missions. The heart literally gets smaller, its walls thinner, its pumping capacity reduced. This might not matter in space, where the demands on the heart are lower, but when astronauts return to Earth, they suddenly need that cardiac capacity again. The heart that has been coasting in microgravity must now pump blood against gravity, must now maintain blood pressure in an upright position, must now support exercise and activity. And it can't. Not fully, not safely. Returning astronauts frequently experience orthostatic intolerance, the inability to stand upright without fainting. Their blood pressure drops when they stand because their weakened cardiovascular system can't compensate for gravity's pull on their blood. Some astronauts have fainted during their post-landing ceremonies. Others have required wheelchairs for days after returning. This is not just inconvenience. For astronauts returning from Mars who might need to land on a planet without ground support, who might need to perform emergency procedures immediately after landing, cardiovascular deconditioning could be fatal. Now let me tell you about what happens to bones. Your bones are not static structures. They're living tissue constantly being broken down and rebuilt. On Earth, the stress of bearing weight stimulates bone formation. Your skeleton adapts to the loads placed on it, maintaining strength where strength is needed. In microgravity, there's no weight to bear. The mechanical stress that stimulates bone formation disappears, and without that stimulus, your body starts breaking down bone faster than it builds it up. Astronauts lose bone at a rate of about 1 to 2% per month in space. This is catastrophic. It's roughly 10 times the rate of bone loss in postmenopausal women with osteoporosis. After 6 months on the International Space Station, astronauts have lost as much bone as an elderly person loses in a decade. The bone loss is not uniform. Weight-bearing bones, the spine, the pelvis, the legs are hit hardest. These are the bones that do the most work on Earth and therefore suffer the most when that work disappears. Where does the lost bone go? It enters the bloodstream as calcium, putting stress on the kidneys. Astronauts have elevated risk of kidney stones in space, painful and potentially dangerous in an environment where medical care is limited. But the real problem comes with return to Earth. When astronauts come back, they suddenly need those bones again. They need to stand, to walk, to run, to carry their own weight. But the bones that should support them have been hollowed out, weakened, made brittle by months of disuse. The risk of fracture skyrockets. Studies have shown that some astronauts never fully recover their bone density, even years after returning from space. They carry the skeletal weakness of space with them for the rest of their lives, an invisible disability, a permanent consequence of their journey. For Mars missions, the situation is even worse. Astronauts would spend 6 to 9 months in microgravity traveling to Mars, then live in Mars's weak gravity, about 38% of Earth's, for months or years, then spend another 6 to 9 months in microgravity returning to Earth. By the time they arrived home, their bones might be so depleted that normal activity would risk fractures. Walking might break their legs. A fall might shatter their pelvis. The skeleton that carried them through their lives would have become a fragile shell. Now, let me explain what happens to muscles. Muscles, like bones, adapt to the loads placed on them on Earth. Even simple activities, standing, walking, climbing stairs, require muscular effort. Your muscles are constantly working against gravity, maintaining tone and strength. In microgravity, this constant work disappears. You don't need muscles to hold yourself up, you float. You don't need muscles to walk, you push off and glide. The muscles that evolved to fight gravity suddenly have nothing to fight. And so they atrophy, they shrink, they weaken. Astronauts lose muscle mass at an alarming rate. Up to 20% of muscle mass can be lost during a 6-month mission. The muscles most affected are the postural muscles and the leg muscles, the ones that work hardest against gravity on Earth. This loss is not just about strength. Muscles are metabolic engines, burning calories, regulating blood sugar, maintaining overall health. Muscle loss affects the entire body, not just physical performance. When astronauts return to Earth, they often describe feeling like they weigh 1,000 pounds. Their muscles, adapted to weightlessness, are suddenly asked to support their full body weight. Walking is exhausting. Climbing stairs is nearly impossible. Simple movements become ordeals. Rehabilitation takes months. Even with intensive physical therapy, some astronauts never fully recover their pre-flight fitness. The muscle memory of Earth, the unconscious competence of moving in gravity, must be relearned, often imperfectly. For Mars astronauts, the rehabilitation challenge would be immense. After years in reduced gravity, their muscles would be profoundly atrophied. The return to Earth's full gravity would be not just uncomfortable, but potentially incapacitating. Now, let me tell you about something even more disturbing, what happens to the eyes. In 2005, Astronaut John Phillips noticed something strange during his mission on the International Space Station. His vision was getting worse. He had gone to space with near-perfect eyesight. He was returning nearsighted. At first, this was thought to be an isolated case. But as more astronauts reported vision problems, a pattern emerged. Something about spaceflight was damaging astronauts' eyes. The condition is now called Spaceflight-Associated Neuroocular Syndrome, or SANS. It affects a significant percentage of astronauts on long-duration missions, and it can cause permanent vision damage. What causes SANS? The leading theory involves the fluid shift I mentioned earlier, the movement of blood and cerebrospinal fluid toward the head in microgravity. On Earth, gravity pulls fluid down toward your feet. Your body has mechanisms to pump fluid back up, but there's always a gradient, more fluid in the lower body, less in the head. In space, this gradient disappears. Fluid accumulates in the head, increasing intracranial pressure, the pressure inside the skull. This elevated pressure pushes on the back of the eyes, flattening the eyeballs, damaging the optic nerve. The results can include optic disc swelling, globe flattening, choroidal folds, and cotton wool spots, all signs of damage to the eye and the optic nerve. Some of these changes are reversible after return to Earth, others are not. More than half of astronauts on long-duration missions experience some form of SANS. For some, the vision changes are minor. For others, they're significant and permanent. Astronauts have returned from space needing glasses for the first time in their lives, their perfect vision destroyed by the environment they traveled through. This is not a problem that can be solved by exercise or medication. It's a fundamental consequence of how fluid behaves in microgravity, of how the human body was never designed for weightlessness. For Mars missions, SANS is a serious concern. Astronauts might arrive at Mars with damaged vision, unable to perform tasks requiring visual acuity. They might return to Earth legally blind. The eyes that showed them the wonders of space might be permanently dimmed by the journey. Now, let me explain something that might be the most terrifying of all. What happens to the brain? Recent studies using MRI scans have revealed that space flight causes significant changes to brain structure. The ventricles, fluid-filled cavities in the brain, expand in space. The brain itself shifts upward, pushed by the accumulating fluid. White matter changes, gray matter redistributes. These changes are not subtle. In some astronauts, the ventricles have expanded by 25% or more. The brain's shape has been visibly altered by spaceflight. What do these changes mean for brain function? We're still learning. Some studies suggest cognitive effects, changes in reaction time, spatial reasoning, emotional regulation. Others suggest that the brain adapts and compensates, maintaining function despite structural changes. But there's cause for concern. The ventricles don't fully return to normal after spaceflight. The fluid-filled spaces in the brain remain enlarged for months or years after return to Earth. Each subsequent spaceflight seems to add to the expansion, suggesting cumulative damage. We don't fully understand the long-term consequences of these brain changes, but we know that they happen, that they persist, and that they might affect cognition, mental health, and neurological function in ways we haven't yet discovered. Now let me tell you about radiation. Beyond the protection of Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere, astronauts are exposed to cosmic radiation, high-energy particles from the sun and from deep space. This radiation penetrates spacecraft walls, penetrates human bodies, damages DNA at the cellular level. On Earth, we're protected from most cosmic radiation. The atmosphere absorbs it, the magnetic field deflects it. We receive a small background dose from natural sources, about 3 millisieverts per year. On the International Space Station, astronauts receive about 150 millisieverts per year, 50 times the Earth background. On a mission to Mars, astronauts would receive even more with less shielding and longer exposure. What does this radiation do? It damages DNA, it causes mutations, it kills cells, it increases cancer risk. NASA estimates that a Mars mission would increase an astronaut's lifetime cancer risk by 5% or more. That's a significant increase, roughly equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for several years. But cancer is not the only concern. Radiation also damages the nervous system, potentially causing cognitive decline. Animal studies have shown that exposure to space radiation causes inflammation in the brain, kills neurons, and impairs memory and learning. Some researchers have described this as space brain, the gradual degradation of cognitive function caused by cosmic radiation. Astronauts on long missions might experience confusion, memory problems, anxiety, depression. The radiation that bathes them throughout their journey is slowly damaging the organ they need most. When they return to Earth, this damage doesn't stop. The mutations are already there, embedded in their DNA, waiting to manifest as cancer or other diseases. The neurological damage is already done. The radiation exposure cannot be reversed. Coming back doesn't save them. It just means they live with the consequences on Earth rather than in space. Now let me discuss the immune system. Studies have shown that spaceflight suppresses the immune system in multiple ways. The production of certain immune cells decreases. The function of others is impaired. Latent viruses like herpes and chickenpox, dormant in most adults, can reactivate. This immune suppression makes astronauts more vulnerable to infection both in space and after return. Their bodies are less able to fight off pathogens, less able to detect and destroy cancer cells, less able to maintain the constant vigilance that keeps us healthy. The causes are multiple: stress, radiation, altered sleep patterns, changes in the microbiome, the direct effects of microgravity on immune cells. The immune system evolved on Earth, in Earth's environment, under Earth's conditions. In space, it malfunctions. When astronauts return, their immune systems are compromised. They're more susceptible to infections, more likely to develop autoimmune problems, more vulnerable to the countless pathogens that surround us on Earth. This might sound minor compared to bone loss or radiation damage, but a weakened immune system affects everything. It increases cancer risk, worsens the impact of other injuries, slows healing, reduces overall health. It's a systemic problem affecting every part of the body. Now let me explain the psychological dimensions. Space is psychologically demanding. Astronauts live in confined spaces, separated from family and friends, exposed to constant danger, unable to escape. The psychological stress is immense. But the return to Earth brings its own psychological challenges. Many astronauts report a strange sense of dislocation after returning. They've seen Earth from space, the thin blue line of the atmosphere, the fragile beauty of the planet, the cosmic perspective that changes how you see everything. Coming back to normal life, with its petty concerns and mundane routines, can feel jarring and depressing. This is sometimes called the overview effect in reverse. The cosmic awareness that astronauts gain in space makes earthly life feel small, insignificant, disconnected from what matters. Some astronauts struggle with depression, anxiety, relationship problems after returning. The experience that made them heroes to the public made them strangers to themselves. They've been changed by their journey, and not all the changes are welcome. In part 2, I want to go deeper into the science of why these changes happen and what makes them so difficult to reverse. Because understanding why coming back kills you requires understanding the fundamental incompatibility between human biology and the space environment. So we've established the devastating toll that spaceflight takes on the human body: cardiovascular deconditioning, bone loss, muscle atrophy, vision damage, brain changes, radiation exposure, immune suppression, psychological trauma. Each of these alone would be serious. Together they create a cascade of damage that transforms returning astronauts into medical patients. Now I want to go deeper into the science. I want to explain why these changes happen at the cellular and molecular level, why they're so difficult to reverse, and why longer missions like those to Mars might push the human body past the point of no return. Because understanding the terrifying reason astronauts can never return to Earth safely requires understanding what space does to biology at its most fundamental level. Let me start with the cellular mechanisms of bone loss, because this illustrates how profoundly space disrupts human biology. Your bones contain two types of cells that work in constant opposition, osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoblasts build bone, they lay down new bone tissue, mineralizing it with calcium and phosphorus. Osteoclasts break down bone, they dissolve old bone tissue, releasing its minerals into the bloodstream. On Earth, these two processes are balanced by mechanical stress. When you stand, walk, run, or lift objects, you place stress on your bones. This stress is detected by cells called osteocytes, which are embedded throughout bone tissue like sentinels. Osteocytes sense mechanical loading and respond by signaling to osteoblasts, build more bone here. They also suppress osteoclasts, don't break down bone that's being used. The result is a dynamic equilibrium bone is constantly being remodeled, but the overall mass stays constant, adapted to the loads you regularly experience. In microgravity, the mechanical loading disappears. Osteocytes no longer sense stress on the bones. Without that signal, they stop telling osteoblasts to build, and they stop telling osteoclasts to hold back. The result is a catastrophic imbalance. Osteoclast activity continues unabated, breaking down bone. Osteoblast activity diminishes, failing to keep up. The bones dissolve from the inside, becoming porous, brittle, weak. This process is mediated by molecular signals proteins called RANKL and OPG that regulate osteoclast activity, signaling pathways involving WNT proteins and sclerostin that control osteoblasts. Space disrupts all of these, shifting the balance decisively toward bone destruction. Exercise in space can help, but it can't fully compensate. The resistance exercises astronauts perform on the ISS provide some mechanical loading, but without gravity, you can't truly replicate the constant stress of bearing your own weight. 2 hours of exercise per day cannot replace 24 hours of gravitational loading. And here's the terrifying part. The bone loss may be partially irreversible. Studies of astronauts returning from long-duration missions show that bone recovery is slow and often incomplete. Some astronauts regain most of their lost bone density within a few years. Others don't. Their bones remain weakened indefinitely, carrying the skeletal signature of their time in space. The reason involves the microarchitecture of bone. Bone isn't just about density, it's about structure. The internal architecture of bone, the trabecular network of tiny struts and supports, gives bone its strength. When this architecture is destroyed by osteoclasts, it doesn't automatically rebuild when bone formation resumes. Imagine a building's steel framework being gradually removed, beam by beam. Even if you later add back the same amount of steel, you won't restore the original structure. The beams won't automatically form the same pattern. The architecture is lost. Similarly, bone that's lost in space doesn't simply regrow in the same pattern when astronauts return to Earth. The microarchitecture may remain compromised even if overall density recovers. The bones look normal on a DEXA scan, but are actually weaker, more prone to fracture. This is why astronauts who spent months on the ISS remain at elevated fracture risk for years after their return. Their bones have been structurally compromised in ways that don't fully heal. Now let me explain the molecular biology of muscle atrophy in space. Muscles, like bones, are maintained by a balance between building and breaking down. Muscle proteins are constantly being synthesized and degraded. On Earth, mechanical loading stimulates synthesis and suppresses degradation. In space, this balance shifts toward degradation. The molecular mechanisms are complex. Mechanical loading activates a pathway called mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin, which promotes protein synthesis. Without loading, mTOR activity decreases and protein synthesis falls. Simultaneously, unloading activates degradation pathways. The ubiquitin proteasome system, the cell's protein recycling machinery, becomes more active. Proteins called atrogens and MRF, one-tag muscle proteins for destruction. The muscles literally digest themselves. There's also a loss of satellite cells, the stem cells that repair and regenerate muscle tissue. These cells normally lie dormant, activated by exercise or injury to produce new muscle fibers. In microgravity, satellite cell function is impaired, reducing the muscle's capacity for regeneration. The muscle loss is not just about size, it's about type. Muscles contain different fiber types: slow twitch fibers for endurance, fast twitch fibers for power. Space causes a shift from slow twitch to fast twitch fibers, making muscles less suited for sustained activity. This matters for return to Earth. The activities of daily life, standing, walking, climbing stairs, require sustained postural effort, exactly what slow twitch fibers provide. Astronauts returning with fast twitch dominant muscles are poorly equipped for Earth's demands. Rehabilitation can restore muscle mass and strength, but it's a long process. The neuromuscular connections, the pathways by which the brain controls muscles, have been altered by months of disuse. Astronauts must relearn how to use their muscles, rebuilding not just tissue but coordination. Some studies suggest that complete recovery of muscle function can take as long as the mission itself, 6 months to recover from 6 months in space. For Mars astronauts who might spend 2 to 3 years in reduced gravity, the recovery period could stretch for years. Now let me explain what we've learned about the cardiovascular changes at a deeper level. The heart is a muscle, and it atrophies in space, just like other muscles. But the cardiovascular changes go beyond simple atrophy. They involve remodeling of the entire circulatory system. On Earth, your blood vessels are constantly adjusting to manage blood pressure. Arteries constrict and dilate. Veins have valves to prevent backflow. The baroreflex system monitors pressure and makes real-time adjustments. This system evolved to manage blood distribution in a gravitational field. In space, the demands change. Blood pressure is more uniform throughout the body. The legs no longer need to fight pooling. The heart no longer needs to pump against a pressure gradient. The cardiovascular system adapts to this easier environment. Blood vessels in the lower body become more compliant. They stretch more easily. Valves and leg veins may become less effective. The baroreflex becomes less sensitive. The system for detecting and correcting blood pressure changes gets sluggish. These adaptations are appropriate for space, but they're catastrophic for return to Earth. When astronauts stand up on Earth, blood rushes to their legs, pulled by gravity. Their compliant blood vessels stretch to accommodate it. Their ineffective venous valves fail to prevent pooling. Their sluggish baroreflex doesn't correct the pressure drop quickly enough. The result is orthostatic intolerance, the inability to maintain blood pressure while standing. Blood pressure drops, blood flow to the brain decreases, and the astronaut feels dizzy, weak, or faints. This isn't a minor inconvenience. In an emergency situation, a fire, a capsule malfunction, a rough landing, an astronaut who can't stand without fainting is in serious danger. The cardiovascular deconditioning that protected them in space now threatens their lives on Earth. Recent research has revealed another cardiovascular concern. Space seems to accelerate arterial stiffening. Astronauts' arteries become less elastic. more rigid changes normally associated with aging. This stiffening increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke. The mechanism may involve the fluid shifts to the head. The increased pressure in the upper body stresses the arterial walls, causing remodeling. Or it may involve the reduced physical activity in space, or the radiation exposure, or some combination of factors. Whatever the cause, astronauts return with older arteries, cardiovascular systems that have aged faster than their chronological years. This premature aging doesn't reverse after return. It persists, contributing to long-term health risks. Now let me go deeper into what's happening with the eyes and brain. The spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome involves more than just fluid pressure. Recent research suggests that the brain-eye connection is being fundamentally disrupted. On Earth, cerebrospinal fluid, the clear fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord, circulates in a specific pattern, flowing upward during the day and draining downward during sleep. Gravity drives this circulation. In space, without gravity, cerebrospinal fluid accumulates around the brain and optic nerve. The pressure doesn't fluctuate normally. It remains elevated continuously. The optic nerve, bathed in this high-pressure fluid, begins to swell. The back of the eyeball, pushed by the pressure, flattens. But there's more. The brain itself responds to this chronic pressure by remodeling. The ventricles, the fluid-filled spaces in the brain, expand to accommodate the extra fluid. Brain tissue shifts and compresses. MRI studies show that astronauts' brains have literally moved inside their skulls. The brain shifts upward, pushed by the accumulating fluid below. The changes are visible, measurable, significant. What does this mean for brain function? We don't fully know. Cognitive testing of astronauts has shown mixed results. Some studies find impairments in processing speed, attention, and emotion recognition. Others find no significant changes. But the structural changes are concerning. The brain is not designed to be compressed, shifted, bathed in excess fluid. Even if overt cognitive impairment doesn't appear immediately, there may be subtle effects, reduced cognitive reserve, increased vulnerability to later neurological problems, accelerated aging of the brain. And the changes don't fully reverse. Studies tracking astronauts for years after their missions show that ventricular enlargement persists. The brain doesn't return to its original shape. The fluid spaces remain expanded, a permanent mark of the time spent in microgravity. For Mars astronauts who would spend years in this environment, the brain changes could be profound. They might return with brains that have been significantly and permanently altered, reshaped by the very environment they ventured into. Now let me explain the radiation damage in more detail, because this is perhaps the most insidious threat. Cosmic radiation is different from the radiation you encounter on Earth. It includes galactic cosmic rays, highly energetic particles from outside our solar system, and solar particle events, bursts of radiation from the Sun. Galactic cosmic rays are particularly dangerous. They include heavy ions, nuclei of elements like iron and carbon, traveling at nearly the speed of light. When these particles hit human tissue, they don't just damage the cells they pass through. They create a cascade of secondary particles, spreading damage along a track through the body. A single heavy ion can damage thousands of cells along its path. It can break DNA strands, create mutations, kill cells outright. The damage is concentrated in a narrow track, but that track can extend through multiple organs. On Earth, these particles are blocked by the atmosphere and magnetic field. In space, they penetrate spacecraft walls as if they weren't there. Shielding helps somewhat, but you can't block galactic cosmic rays with any reasonable amount of material. They're simply too energetic. The damage from this radiation is cumulative. Each particle that passes through your body leaves its mark-broken DNA, mutated cells, dead tissue. The more time you spend in space, the more damage accumulates. Your cells have repair mechanisms for DNA damage, but these mechanisms aren't perfect. Some damage gets fixed correctly, some gets fixed incorrectly, creating mutations. Some isn't fixed at all. Over time, the mutations accumulate. This is why radiation exposure increases cancer risk. Cancer occurs when cells accumulate enough mutations to grow uncontrollably. More radiation means more mutations, which means higher probability that some cell somewhere will become cancerous. But cancer is a long-term risk. The more immediate concern is the damage to the nervous system. Neurons are particularly vulnerable to radiation. Unlike other cells, neurons generally don't divide when they're damaged. They can't be replaced. Radiation kills neurons, and those neurons are gone forever. Animal studies have shown that exposure to space-like radiation causes neuroinflammation, reduces synaptic plasticity, impairs memory and learning. Mice exposed to radiation show changes in behavior, increased anxiety, reduced social interaction, cognitive deficits. Human brains are more complex than mouse brains, and we can't do controlled experiments on human radiation exposure. But the animal studies are concerning. They suggest that the radiation astronauts receive could cause progressive cognitive decline, a slow erosion of mental function that might not be apparent until years after the mission. This is sometimes called space dementia, the gradual loss of cognitive function caused by cosmic radiation. It's a hypothetical risk not yet confirmed in humans. But the biology suggests it's plausible, and the implications are frightening. Astronauts might return from Mars with brains that are not just structurally altered by fluid shifts, but cellularly damaged by radiation. They might experience accelerated cognitive aging, early onset dementia, personality changes. The minds that carried them to another planet might be permanently degraded by the journey. Now let me discuss the immune system changes in more detail. The immune system is not a single organ, but a network of cells, tissues, and signals spread throughout the body. Spaceflight disrupts this network at multiple levels. First, the stress of spaceflight affects immune function. Chronic stress suppresses immunity through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the hormonal system that manages stress responses. Elevated cortisol levels suppress immune cell function, reducing the body's ability to fight infection. Second, radiation damages immune cells directly. The cells of the immune system are constantly dividing, and rapidly dividing cells are most vulnerable to radiation damage. Radiation kills immune precursors, reducing the body's ability to generate new immune cells. Third, microgravity affects immune cell behavior. Studies have shown that T cells, key orchestrators of the immune response, function differently in microgravity. They activate more slowly, proliferate less effectively, produce fewer signaling molecules. The reasons are not fully understood, but the effects are measurable. Fourth, the microbiome changes in space. The trillions of bacteria that live in your gut and that play a crucial role in immune function are altered by spaceflight. The composition shifts, with some species increasing and others decreasing. This dysbiosis affects immunity, metabolism, and overall health. The combination of these factors leaves astronauts immunocompromised. Their bodies are less able to fight infection, less able to control inflammation, less able to maintain the delicate balance that keeps us healthy. One manifestation is viral reactivation. Most adults carry dormant viruses, herpes, simplex, varicella zoster, chickenpox, Epstein-Barr. These viruses are kept in check by the immune system, lying latent in cells without causing symptoms. In space, as immunity weakens, these viruses reactivate. Astronauts shed viral particles in their saliva, indicating active infection. Some develop symptoms, cold sores, shingles, fatigue. The viruses that their immune systems had contained for decades suddenly awaken when astronauts return to Earth. Their immune systems must rebuild. This takes time, weeks to months, during which they remain vulnerable. They've returned to a planet teeming with pathogens, with an immune system that's not ready to fight them. For Mars astronauts, the immune suppression would be prolonged years of weakened immunity, years of viral reactivation risk, years of accumulating damage. By the time they return to Earth, their immune systems might be so compromised that even common infections become serious threats. Now let me explain the genetic changes that occur in space. The most famous study of spaceflight genetics involved the Kelly twins, Scott, who spent a year on the ISS, and Mark, who stayed on Earth. By comparing identical twins, researchers could isolate the effects of spaceflight from genetic variation. The results were striking. Scott's gene expression changed dramatically during his time in space. Thousands of genes were expressed differently than in his twin. His telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, lengthened during spaceflight, then shortened rapidly after return. His gut microbiome shifted. His cognitive function showed subtle changes. Many of these changes reversed after return to Earth, but some didn't. About 7% of Scott's gene expression changes persisted for months after landing. His telomeres remained shorter than before the mission, not lengthened as during flight, but shortened below baseline. This suggests that spaceflight causes lasting epigenetic changes, modifications to how genes are expressed, even without changing the DNA sequence itself. These changes can affect health, aging, disease risk. The telomere findings are particularly interesting. Telomeres normally shorten with age, and shorter telomeres are associated with aging and disease. The temporary lengthening in space, followed by rapid shortening after return, suggests that spaceflight stresses the mechanisms of cellular aging. Some researchers have speculated that spaceflight might accelerate biological aging, that astronauts might age faster at the cellular level than their Earthbound counterparts. The evidence is not conclusive, but the possibility is sobering. Returning from space might mean returning to a body that has aged not just in the obvious ways, like bone loss and muscle atrophy, but at the fundamental level of cellular function. The price of visiting the cosmos might be paid in years of life. In Part 3, I want to explore what this means for the future of space exploration. Can we overcome these challenges? Can we make the return to Earth safe? Or are there fundamental limits to how far humans can go without paying an unacceptable biological price? Because the terrifying reason astronauts can never return to Earth safely isn't just a current problem, it might be an inherent feature of what it means for humans to leave our home planet. So we've journeyed through the devastating effects of spaceflight on the human body, the cardiovascular deconditioning, the bone loss, the muscle atrophy, the vision damage, the brain changes, the radiation exposure, the immune suppression, the genetic alterations. We've explored the molecular mechanisms, the cellular damage, the systemic disruption that space inflicts on human biology. Now I want to confront the deepest implications of what we've learned. What does this mean for the future of human space exploration? Can we overcome these challenges, or are they fundamental barriers? And what does it mean that the cosmos we dream of exploring is so fundamentally hostile to the biology we carry with us? Because the terrifying reason astronauts can never return to Earth safely isn't just a medical problem to be solved. It might be a fundamental truth about what it means to be human in a universe that wasn't designed for us. Let me start by examining the Mars mission scenario in detail, because this is where all these problems converge into a potential catastrophe. A mission to Mars would be the most ambitious human spaceflight ever attempted. The journey would take 6 to 9 months each way, with a stay on Mars lasting anywhere from a few weeks to over a year, depending on orbital mechanics and mission design. Let's consider the most likely scenario: a conjunction-class mission where astronauts stay on Mars for about 500 days waiting for the planets to align for an efficient return trajectory. Including transit, the total mission duration would be about 900 days, nearly 2.5 years. Now let's trace what happens to the human body over this journey. During the outbound transit, 6 to 9 months in microgravity, all the processes we've discussed begin. Bones start losing density at 1 to 2% per month. Muscles begin to atrophy. The cardiovascular system deconditions. Fluid shifts to the head, increasing intracranial pressure. Radiation exposure accumulates. By the time astronauts reach Mars, they've already lost significant bone mass, perhaps 15% in the most vulnerable areas. Their muscles have atrophied substantially. Their hearts have shrunk. Their eyes may already show signs of damage. They've received a significant radiation dose, perhaps 300 to 400 millisieverts, roughly equivalent to 100 to 150 chest X-rays. And now they must land on Mars and function. Mars has gravity about 38% of Earth's. This is better than microgravity, but far from Earth normal. The partial gravity will slow some deconditioning processes, but won't stop them entirely. Bones will continue to lose density, just more slowly. Muscles will continue to weaken. The astronauts will need to perform demanding physical tasks, setting up habitats, conducting scientific research, maintaining equipment, potentially handling emergencies. They'll be doing this with weakened bodies, in bulky spacesuits, in an environment where a single mistake could be fatal. The radiation exposure continues. Mars has a thin atmosphere and no global magnetic field. The surface receives about half the radiation of deep space, better than the transit, but still far more than Earth. Over 500 days on the surface, astronauts would accumulate another 200 to 300 millisieverts. By the time they board their spacecraft for the return journey, they've been away from Earth for nearly 2 years. Their bodies have adapted to reduced gravity environments. Their bones are significantly depleted. Their muscles are atrophied. Their cardiovascular systems are deconditioned. Their eyes may be damaged. They've received a cumulative radiation dose approaching 1 sievert, the amount that increases lifetime cancer risk by about 5%. And now they face another 6 to 9 months of microgravity. During this return transit, all the deconditioning processes accelerate again. The bones that partially stabilize in Mars's gravity resume their rapid loss. The muscles that maintain some function continue to wither. The cardiovascular adaptation to weightlessness deepens. When they finally reach Earth, after 900 days away, they will be in the worst physical condition of their lives. They will have lost 2, 5, 30% of their bone mass in critical areas. Their muscles will be profoundly atrophied. Their hearts will be weakened. Their eyes may be permanently damaged. Their brains will have been structurally altered. Their DNA will carry accumulated radiation damage. Their immune systems will be suppressed. And then comes the landing. Earth's gravity will hit them like a truck. After nearly 3 years in reduced or zero gravity, they'll suddenly experience the full force of Earth's pull, the force their bodies evolved to handle but have forgotten how to manage. Can they even stand? Can they walk? Can they evacuate the capsule in an emergency? Current evidence suggests many won't be able to. After just 6 months on the ISS, some astronauts need assistance to walk. After nearly 3 years, the deconditioning will be far more severe. Astronauts might be unable to support their own weight. They might be at risk of bone fractures from simply standing. Their blood pressure might collapse when they try to sit up. The return to Earth, the triumphant homecoming we imagine in movies, might be a medical emergency. Astronauts might need to be carried from their capsule on stretchers. They might need immediate hospitalization. They might face months or years of rehabilitation before regaining basic function. And some damage might never heal. The radiation exposure cannot be undone. The mutations are in their DNA, waiting to manifest as cancer. The neurological damage from radiation and fluid shifts may be permanent. The vision loss may be irreversible. The bone microarchitecture may never fully recover. Coming back kills you. Not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, progressively, inevitably, the price of visiting Mars might be paid over the remaining years of life in increased cancer risk, in chronic health problems, in reduced quality of life, in years taken off the end. This is the terrifying calculus that space agencies must confront. Is Mars worth this price? Are the scientific discoveries, the human achievement, the inspiration, are these worth the cost in human health and life? Now, let me examine what we're doing to try to solve these problems, because the scientific community is not simply accepting these limitations. The most straightforward countermeasure is exercise. Astronauts on the ISS exercise about 2 hours per day using specially designed equipment, treadmills with harnesses that pull them down, resistance machines that simulate weightlifting, cycling, ergometers. This exercise helps, but it doesn't fully compensate for the lack of gravity. Studies show that even with rigorous exercise, astronauts still lose significant bone and muscle mass. Exercise can slow the loss, but not prevent it entirely. The problem is that exercise provides intermittent loading, while gravity provides constant loading. On Earth, your bones and muscles are stressed every moment. You're awake, standing, walking, even sitting requires muscular effort. You can't replicate 16 hours of gravitational loading with 2 hours of exercise. Researchers are developing more advanced exercise protocols and equipment. Higher intensity resistance training seems to be more effective than moderate exercise. Vibration platforms might help stimulate bone formation. Pharmaceutical countermeasures, drugs that promote bone formation or prevent muscle breakdown, are being investigated. But all of these are partial solutions at best. They can reduce the rate of deconditioning, but they can't eliminate it. As long as astronauts are in microgravity, their bodies will adapt to microgravity, and that adaptation makes them unfit for Earth. The most promising long-term solution is artificial gravity. The concept is simple: spin the spacecraft or a portion of it. The rotation creates centrifugal force that mimics gravity. Astronauts inside the rotating section would feel a force pulling them toward the outer wall, just as gravity pulls them toward Earth. This isn't science fiction, it's basic physics. We've known how to create artificial gravity for over a century. The challenge is engineering, building spacecraft large enough to rotate without causing motion sickness, strong enough to withstand the stresses, affordable enough to actually launch. Several concepts have been proposed. One approach rotates the entire spacecraft with the habitat at the end of a long tether or truss. Another approach creates a small centrifuge within the spacecraft, a rotating compartment where astronauts spend part of each day. NASA and other agencies have studied artificial gravity for decades, but no spacecraft with artificial gravity has ever been built. The engineering challenges are substantial, the costs are high, and the benefits, while theoretically clear, have never been demonstrated in practice. We don't actually know how much artificial gravity is needed to prevent deconditioning. Is Mars gravity 38% of Earth's enough? Is lunar gravity 17% enough? What's the minimum effective dose? We also don't know how the body responds to intermittent artificial gravity, spending some hours each day in a centrifuge while spending other hours in microgravity. Would this be as effective as constant gravity? Would there be problems from the constant transitions? These questions could be answered with research, but the research hasn't been done. No spinning spacecraft has carried humans. No systematic study of artificial gravity effects on human physiology has been conducted in space. This is one of the great gaps in our knowledge about human spaceflight. We're planning missions to Mars without understanding whether artificial gravity could prevent the damage we know will occur. We're sending astronauts into harm's way without knowing whether a solution exists. Now let me discuss the radiation problem, because this may be the hardest challenge of all. Unlike deconditioning, which can theoretically be addressed with artificial gravity, radiation damage is cumulative and largely unavoidable. Cosmic rays penetrate virtually any reasonable amount of shielding. The only way to reduce exposure is to reduce time in space. Various shielding concepts have been proposed. Water is a good radiation shield. A layer of water around the habitat would absorb some radiation. Polyethylene and other hydrogen-rich materials are also effective. But the amount of shielding needed to significantly reduce exposure is massive, tons of material that would be prohibitively expensive to launch. Some researchers have proposed using magnetic or electrostatic fields to deflect charged particles, mimicking Earth's natural protection. But the energy requirements are enormous, and the technology is far from ready. Pharmaceutical countermeasures are another possibility. Antioxidants might reduce oxidative damage from radiation. Radioprotective drugs might help cells survive radiation exposure. Drugs that enhance DNA repair might reduce mutation rates. Some of these approaches show promise in laboratory studies, but none have been validated in humans exposed to space radiation. The complexity of radiation damage affecting multiple organ systems through multiple mechanisms makes a simple pharmaceutical solution unlikely. The most realistic near-term approach is simply accepting a certain level of radiation exposure and managing the consequences. This means careful monitoring of astronaut health both during and after missions. It means being prepared to treat radiation-related diseases. It means being honest about the risks astronauts are accepting. Currently, NASA limits astronaut radiation exposure to levels that increase lifetime cancer risk by no more than 3%. This limit effectively caps how long any individual astronaut can spend in space over their career. For a Mars mission, this limit would likely need to be raised. Astronauts would need to accept higher risk than current standards allow. Some have argued that astronauts should be allowed to accept any risk they choose, that consenting adults should be free to trade health for exploration. Others argue that regulatory limits exist for good reasons, and that relaxing them sets a dangerous precedent. This is not just a scientific question, but an ethical one. How much risk is acceptable? Who decides? What obligations do space agencies have to protect their astronauts versus respecting astronaut autonomy? Now let me discuss the vision and neurological issues, because these represent some of the most concerning recent discoveries. Spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome was not well recognized until the era of long-duration ISS missions. We've only been studying it systematically for about 15 years. Our understanding is still evolving. The fundamental problem seems to be that the human body cannot properly regulate intracranial pressure without gravity. On Earth, pressure fluctuates naturally higher when lying down, lower when standing. This fluctuation seems to be important for eye and brain health. In microgravity, the pressure stays elevated continuously. There's no relief, no daily cycle of high and low pressure. The optic nerve is bathed in high-pressure fluid around the clock, day after day, month after month. Various countermeasures have been proposed. Lower body negative pressure, a device that creates suction on the lower body, pulling fluid downward, might provide temporary relief. Sleeping in a posture that elevates the head might help. Special contact lenses that compensate for eyeball flattening have been developed. But none of these address the fundamental problem. As long as astronauts are in microgravity, fluid will accumulate in the head. The pressure will remain elevated. The damage will continue. Artificial gravity would help here too. It would restore the normal fluid distribution, relieve the pressure on the optic nerve, allow the eyes and brain to function normally. This is another reason why artificial gravity may be essential for long-duration spaceflight. The brain changes are perhaps even more concerning than the eye changes. The ventricles enlarging, the brain shifting, the white matter changes, these affect the organ that makes us who we are. We don't fully understand the functional consequences of these structural changes. Cognitive testing has shown mixed results. Some studies find impairments, others don't. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The changes might cause subtle effects that our tests aren't sensitive enough to detect. Or they might cause problems that only emerge years later. There's also the question of cumulative damage. Each space flight seems to cause ventricular enlargement, and the ventricles don't fully return to normal between flights. Astronauts who fly multiple missions accumulate more change with each mission. This has implications for career astronauts, the experienced professionals who fly mission after mission. Are we slowly damaging their brains? Will they face higher rates of neurological problems as they age? Are we trading their cognitive health for space exploration? These questions don't have answers yet. We haven't followed enough astronauts for long enough to know the long-term consequences, but the structural changes are real and measurable, and it would be foolish to assume they're harmless. Now let me consider the psychological dimensions in more depth. The physical challenges of spaceflight are substantial, but the psychological challenges may be equally daunting, especially for long-duration missions. Mars astronauts would face unprecedented psychological stressors. The isolation would be extreme. They would be farther from Earth than any human has ever been, unable to return quickly if problems arose, with communication delays of up to 20 minutes each way. The confinement would be severe, living in a small spacecraft with the same few people for nearly 3 years, with no possibility of escape, no ability to take a break, no fresh faces or new stimulations. The danger would be constant every day, bringing risks of equipment failure, medical emergencies, accidents that could strand them millions of miles from help, and the monotony might be the worst challenge of all. After the initial excitement of launch and the novelty of Mars landing, most of the mission would be routine, the same tasks, the same views, the same people, day after day for hundreds of days. How do humans respond to such conditions? Historical analogies: Antarctic expeditions, submarine patrols, isolated research stations suggest that psychological problems are common. Depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflict, cognitive degradation, all have been observed in isolated, confined environments. Some individuals adapt well, others don't. Predicting who will thrive and who will struggle is difficult. Screening can eliminate the clearly unsuitable, but it can't guarantee that those selected will remain psychologically healthy over a multi-year mission. And here's the thing: psychological problems don't stay psychological. Stress affects the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system. Depression can accelerate physical deconditioning. Interpersonal conflict can impair mission performance. A psychological crisis could compromise the entire mission. The return to Earth brings its own psychological challenges. Astronauts must readapt, not just physically, but psychologically, returning to a world that has continued without them, reconnecting with relationships that have been on hold, finding meaning after the most extraordinary experience of their lives. Some astronauts have struggled with this. They've experienced depression, relationship problems, difficulty reintegrating into normal life. The overview effect, the profound cognitive shift that comes from seeing Earth from space, can make normal concerns seem trivial, making it hard to engage with everyday life. For Mars astronauts, this psychological readjustment would be even more challenging. They would return as transformed people, changed by their experience, potentially damaged in ways both physical and psychological, facing a society that cannot fully understand what they've been through. Now let me address a question that underlies all of this. Are humans designed for space at all? The answer clearly is no. Human biology evolved on Earth, under Earth's conditions, for Earth's environment. Every aspect of our physiology assumes the presence of gravity. the protection of the atmosphere and magnetic field, the light and dark cycles of Earth's rotation. Space is not just different from Earth, it's actively hostile to human biology. Microgravity causes deconditioning, radiation causes damage, isolation causes psychological stress. The vacuum would kill us instantly without protection. We can survive in space, we've proven that, but survival is not thriving. The astronauts who have spent months on the ISS have survived, but they've also been damaged. They've returned weaker, with altered bodies and minds, carrying invisible injuries that may affect them for the rest of their lives. This raises a profound question. Should we be sending humans to space at all? The pragmatic argument is that robots can do most of what humans can do in space without the life support requirements, without the radiation exposure, without the return ticket. Robotic missions have explored Mars, landed on asteroids, visited the outer planets. They can do science without risking lives. The counter-argument is that humans bring something robots cannot: adaptability, intuition, the ability to respond to unexpected situations. A human geologist on Mars could accomplish in a day what a rover accomplishes in months. Human judgment, human creativity, human presence, these have value that robots cannot replicate. But there's also something deeper at stake. Human space exploration is not just about science. It's about expanding the boundaries of human experience, about becoming a multi-planetary species, about taking our place in the cosmos. These are aspirations that cannot be fulfilled by robots. The question is whether these aspirations justify the cost in money, yes, but more importantly, the cost in human health and life. Now let me explore what the future might look like, the possible paths forward for human space exploration. One path is to accept the limitations and proceed cautiously. Send humans to space for limited durations, accepting the damage as the price of exploration. Focus on the moon, which is close enough for short missions and emergency return. Develop Mars missions only when absolutely necessary, with full understanding of the health costs. This cautious path might be the most responsible, but it's also the least inspiring. It accepts that humans will never truly become a spacefaring species that will remain tied to Earth, making occasional forays into space but always returning to our home planet. Another path is to invest heavily in solving the biological problems. Develop artificial gravity systems that can be deployed on long-duration missions. Create advanced radiation shielding or protective drugs. Find countermeasures for every system affected by spaceflight. This ambitious path would require massive investment, probably tens of billions of dollars over decades. The payoff would be the ability to send humans throughout the solar system without destroying their bodies in the process. But there's no guarantee of success. Some problems might prove intractable. A third path is to change the humans. If the human body isn't suited for space, perhaps we can modify it to be better adapted. This might sound like science fiction, but the technologies are closer than you might think. Gene editing could potentially enhance radiation resistance, bone density, muscle retention. Pharmaceutical interventions could modify the body's response to microgravity. Cybernetic enhancements could supplement biological systems that fail in space. This path raises profound ethical questions. How much modification is acceptable? At what point does an enhanced human become something other than human? Do we have the right to create humans designed for space who might never be able to live comfortably on Earth? A fourth path is to accept that space is not for biology as we know it. If human bodies cannot thrive in space, perhaps human minds can upload it to artificial systems instantiated in robotic bodies, exploring the cosmos without the limitations of flesh. This is the most radical possibility and the most distant. We don't know how to upload minds, don't know if it's possible, don't know what such entities would experience. But if space is fundamentally hostile to biological life, this might be the only way for humanity or something descended from humanity to truly become a spacefaring civilization. Now let me consider what all of this means for the astronauts themselves, the people who accept these risks, who volunteer for these missions, who pay the price in their own bodies. Astronauts are not victims. They're highly trained professionals who understand the risks and choose to accept them. They undergo extensive medical screening, informed consent processes, and ongoing health monitoring. They know what they're getting into. But do they really? The full extent of spaceflight's effects is still being discovered. Astronauts who flew in the early days of the ISS didn't know about SANS. The vision problems hadn't been recognized yet. Astronauts today don't know the full long-term consequences of the exposures. They're accepting those consequences haven't been documented yet. There's an inherent uncertainty in being an astronaut. You're accepting known risks, but also unknown risks, problems that haven't been identified yet, consequences that won't become apparent for years or decades. This is true of many professions, of course. Firefighters, soldiers, coal miners all accept occupational hazards that may affect their long-term health. But the risks of spaceflight are unusual in their scope and severity and in how much we don't know about them. The astronaut corps tends to attract people who are comfortable with risk, who are driven by the mission, who are willing to sacrifice for the greater good. These are admirable qualities, but they can also lead to underestimating dangers, to accepting risks that shouldn't be accepted, to a culture where raising concerns about safety is discouraged. Space agencies must balance the enthusiasm of their astronauts against the duty to protect them. It's not enough for astronauts to be willing to accept risks. The risks must be acceptable, proportionate to the benefits, minimized to the extent possible, fully understood by all parties. This balance is difficult to achieve, especially when the desire to explore is strong and the risks are uncertain. The history of human spaceflight includes tragedies that resulted from taking excessive risks. Challenger, Columbia, Apollo 1. The pressure to achieve, to advance, to explore has sometimes overridden the caution that safety requires. As we contemplate missions to Mars and beyond, this tension will only intensify. The risks are higher, the uncertainties greater, the consequences more severe. The question of how much risk is acceptable becomes more urgent as the risks grow. Now let me reflect on what this all means, not just for space exploration, but for our understanding of our place in the universe. We evolved on Earth. Every cell in our bodies carries the imprint of Earth's environment, the gravity, the radiation shielding, the light and dark cycles, the atmospheric composition. We are not universal beings. We are Earth beings, exquisitely adapted to one particular world. When we leave that world, we leave the environment that made us. We enter a cosmos that is, from our biological perspective, hostile and alien. Space doesn't care about us. It's not designed for us. It will damage and degrade and ultimately destroy any biological system that ventures into it unprotected. This is humbling. We like to think of ourselves as masters of our destiny, capable of going anywhere and doing anything. But the universe reminds us that we're fragile, limited, adapted to a narrow range of conditions that happen to exist on one small planet. The terrifying reason astronauts can never return to Earth safely is, at its core, a reminder of this fragility. We can build rockets and spacesuits and habitats. We can develop countermeasures and treatments and technologies, but we cannot change the fundamental truth that we are Earthlings and Earth is where we belong. Does this mean we should stay home? Should we abandon the dream of exploring the cosmos, accept our limitations, tend our garden on this one small world? I don't think so. Humans have always pushed against limitations, ventured into hostile environments, accepted risks in the pursuit of knowledge and discovery. We've explored deserts and jungles, climbed mountains and descended into seas, traveled to the poles and the depths of the ocean. Each of these environments was hostile. Each posed risks. Each taught us something about ourselves and our world. Space is the ultimate hostile environment, and exploring it will teach us more than any previous frontier. The challenges we face, the biological problems, the engineering obstacles, the psychological demands will drive innovations that benefit life on Earth. The knowledge we gain about the cosmos, about life, about ourselves will expand human understanding in ways we cannot predict. But we must go with eyes open. We must acknowledge the costs, accept the risks, make informed decisions about what we're willing to sacrifice and why. We must not pretend that space is safe when it isn't, or that the problems are solved when they aren't. Coming back kills you. This is the truth that astronauts live with, that space agencies must confront, that anyone who dreams of exploring the cosmos must accept. Space is not a playground, it's a battlefield, and the fight is against the fundamental incompatibility between human biology and the cosmic environment. We can win this battle, maybe, with enough research, enough investment, enough ingenuity. We might find ways to protect human bodies from the ravages of space. We might develop artificial gravity systems that prevent deconditioning, shielding that stops radiation, countermeasures that preserve health. We might even modify human biology itself, creating astronauts who can thrive where natural humans cannot. But we might not. Some problems might prove intractable. Some damage might be unavoidable. Some aspects of space might remain forever hostile to human life. If so, we face a choice. We can accept the limits, restrict human spaceflight to what biology can tolerate, let robots explore the distances too great for flesh. Or we can accept the costs, send humans knowing they'll return damaged, trade health for exploration. Neither choice is clearly right or wrong. Both involve trade-offs, sacrifices, judgments about what matters and what doesn't. These are not scientific questions, they're human questions requiring human wisdom to answer. The terrifying reason astronauts can never return to Earth safely is, in the end, not just about medicine or biology or engineering. It's about who we are and who we want to become. It's about how we relate to the cosmos that created us and the planet that sustains us. It's about the meaning of exploration, the value of knowledge, the price we're willing to pay. We are Earthlings. We evolved here, we belong here, and when we leave, we pay a price. That price may be acceptable or unacceptable depending on what we hope to achieve. But it cannot be avoided, cannot be ignored, cannot be wished away. Coming back kills you. This is the truth. What we do with that truth, how we respond to it, what choices we make, what futures we create, that's up to us. The cosmos awaits. The question is not whether we can explore it, we can at a cost. The question is whether we will, knowing what that cost is, accepting it with full understanding, venturing forth anyway into the hostile beauty of the universe. That's the choice before us. That's what the terrifying truth about astronauts and Earth return ultimately demands we confront. Not just the science, not just the medicine, not just the engineering, but the deepest questions about what it means to be human, what we value, and how far we're willing to go. The universe is vast and beautiful and deadly. We are small and fragile and brave. The story of human space exploration is the story of this confrontation between cosmic indifference and human aspiration, between biological limitation and technological ambition, between the world that made us and the worlds we dream of reaching. Coming back kills you, but we keep going anyway. And perhaps that the willingness to face the terrifying truth and venture forth nonetheless is the most human thing of all.